A very good morning, dear friends. Welcome to yet another session on film studies. In today's class, we'll be focusing on one of the factors that add meaning to cinema. So, before we move into today's session, I would like to brush up your memory regarding the things that we have learned in the last few classes. So we started the film studies paper with an introduction to cinema, where we first dealt with the topic understanding cinema, how to understand a film, the hybrid nature of film. Then we trace the history of film, the evolution of narrative cinema, the language of cinema or the film language, where we learn the four factors that add meaning to it. And the four factors are mise-en-scène, cinematography, editing, and sound. Of the four factors, we have looked into the first two, mise-en-scène and cinematography. I hope you remember mise-en-scène. Mise-en-scène comprises of settings, costume, lighting, props, and action. These are the four major elements of mise-en-scène. And along with this, the ambience of the landscape within the frame of a shot, the movements within the camera, all these are part of mise-en-scène. Then after mise-en-scène came cinematography, and cinematography was something that we discussed in the last class. I hope you all watched the video that was uploaded along with the lecture, and you've got a fair idea about how cinematography adds meaning to film. Now, moving on to the third part or the third factor that adds meaning to cinema, that is editing. We're quite familiar with this particular term, editing, because nowadays, with the mobile phone in our hands, we all do editing. We do mostly the editing of our photos. But what is exactly editing in film? Editing, the very word edit, if you check the dictionary, the word edit is described as or defined as to prepare a motion picture film or a video by deleting, arranging, and splicing by synchronizing the sound record with the film. How to delete, arrange, and splice certain sequences or certain shots along with the sound effects in order to get a coherent one. That is editing. Editing is a creative, artistic practice of assembling shots into a coherent one. So it is a practice, at the same time, it is an art that demands creativity. It is also a technique, so technology is very much needed. And normally, what do we edit? As I said, we do edit pictures, and in a film, it is again editing of pictures, editing of sound, dialogue, and music. So, professional knowledge and technical expertise of film are needed in order to edit a film or in order to become an editor, a film editor. Now, film editing is part of the post production along with the other aspects like sound editing, mixing, computer generated effects, and soundtrack creation. And the film editor's job is to join together various shots into scenes and scenes into a familiar movie. So, editing can be defined using the formula shot into scene into sequence. This is what happens. A shot, we know, a shot is a very short, continuous single run of the film. That is a shot. A continuous single run of a film is a shot. A scene is composed of numerous shots, and these numerous shots are joined together in a scene. And a sequence is a number of scenes joined that could be a large portion of the movie when it is finished. So these are the three elements in our formula: shot into scene in the sequence. This is what we do in editing. So the film editor's job is to, as I said, join these shots into scenes and scenes into a familiar movie. So they usually work very close with the director to realize his or her version of the film. And before the advent of digital editing, the film editor would literally cut up film and piece it back together. We are quite familiar with those long film rolls. So an editor would take long strips of film, cut them very precisely, and stick them to other strips with a tape and glue, creating rolls of film. That was done prior to the digital era. And editing is called as the invisible art. And the aim of all editors is to create a seamless finished product with no trace of their cutting or editing. When we watch a video or a movie, there won't be any a particular scene, there won't be a scene or a shot or a sequence where we feel that someone has tampered this particular scene, someone did some sort of editing work in this particular scene. One should never feel that. That is a seamless transition or the seamless cutting or the invisible art that we see here. It is up to the editor to slice the footages together to create a story. So the editor begins all these with the film footage. And footage is the raw, unedited material which was originally filmed by the movie camera, which must be edited to create a motion picture or a video clip. So, what is the original raw material? The original footage. That is a raw material with which the editor begins his job. Now, there are different types of editing, like chronological editing, continuity editing, parallel editing or cross cutting, analytical editing, montage, and with montage we'll learn about Kuleshov effect, and there are also cut or sequencing, dissolve, wipe, and temporal ellipsis. And there are different types of cuts also, like continuity cuts, jump cuts, match cuts, cross cuts, montage cuts, compilation cuts, rough cut or the director's cut, cutaways, fade in and fade out. These are the major processes that happen in this art called editing. So first let's have a look into the chronological editing. Chronological editing, as the term indicates, follows a very logic of a chronological narrative. And chronological editing is very closely related to continuity editing also, because the events here follow a very natural, logical sequence, and the time and space are respected without any jumps. And chronological editing is something that we see in the earlier cinema, especially of the classic Hollywood cinema, where there is a linear narrative. Again, even during the Malayalam films during the 90s or the beginning of the 20th century, also we had films that followed this linear pattern, the chronological pattern. Then came continuity editing. Continuity editing is a very highly codified system of film editing, a system of cutting to maintain a continuous and clear narrative action. As I said earlier, chronological editing and continuity editing are closely related, because here also logical coherence is achieved at the end. And a very basic principle of editing is the 100 So the 180-degree rule, I hope you remember the 180-degree rule that was there in the last class, one of the videos that was uploaded along with the session on cinematography dealt with this 180-degree rule. The 180-degree rule ensures the visual continuity from one shot to the other. So, continuity editing makes use of the 180-degree rule. So, the only disruption that would happen in continuity editing is in the form of flashback. Flashback is the only, if any flashback is there, that is the only disruption of any temporal continuity in continuity editing. Then comes parallel editing or cross cutting. Parallel editing is also known as parallel montage, and it is an editing technique which depicts the story action taking place in separate locations within the same time frame or for related actions occurring at different times. So, the action of the story taking place at different locations within the same time frame. സെയിം ടൈം ഫ്രെയിമിനുള്ളിൽ നമ്മുടെ സ്റ്റോറിയുടെ ആക്ഷൻ ഡിഫറെൻറ്റ് ലൊക്കേഷൻസ് നടക്കുന്നു അത് ഒരേപോലെ നമ്മൾ കാണിച്ചു തരുന്നു യൂഷ്വലി ദിസ് പെർട്ടിക്കുലർ എഡിറ്റിംഗ് ഇസ് യൂസ് ടു ക്രിയേറ്റ് സസ്പെൻസ് ആൻഡ് എക്സൈറ്റ്മെൻറ്റ് മോസ്റ്റ്ലി ഇൻ ത്രില്ലർ മൂവീസ് when someone is sleeping and on the outside the room someone is trying to uh, get into the room or someone is trying to steal something. So both these rooms inside the house or maybe another different location in another different country. So these are shown together. ഇവിടെയാണ് ആ ഒരു ക്രോസ് കട്ടിങ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പാരലൽ എഡിറ്റിംഗ് നമുക്ക് കാണാൻ സാധിക്കുക. And again widely used in chase sequences. Chase സീക്വൻസിലൊക്കെ ഈ ഒരു ത്രില്ല് എക്സൈറ്റ്മെന്റ് ക്രിയേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് this particular editing is used. Then comes analytical editing. Analytical editing, or it is also known as decoupage, it is a French word of cutting up. It aims to achieve a sense of spatial fluidity, where the shots they develop an internal rhythm as they begin with an establishing shot of a particular location and give way to a series of closer shots of characters and objects within the space. So you will a few videos will be uploaded along with this, so you will learn what is an establishment shot. So this kind of editing usually begins with an establishing shot of a particular location. So location is established at first and then a few close shots of the characters and the objects are shown. Then comes montage, and montage, along with montage, we have Kuleshov effect and the montage school or the Soviet montage. And I request you all to watch the video that will follow this lecture now. That will give you a very clear idea about the entire montage school or Soviet montage.
This Filmmaker IQ lesson is sponsored by Blackmagic Design, creating the world's highest quality solutions for feature film, post-production, and television broadcast industries. Hi, John Hess from FilmmakerIQ.com, and in this lesson we'll look at how early Soviet filmmakers established the theory of montage, an editing style that assembled together different shots that added a new, sophisticated element to cinematic language. At the end of the First World War, Russia was in disarray. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, had overthrown the Tsar in 1917, and the country of 160 million people, mostly poor and illiterate, was torn apart from years of civil war. The first task of the ruling party was to consolidate and communicate, and they turned to film as a mass communication medium. But the producers and the technicians of the pre-revolutionary cinema
were capitalists, and most of them were driven out or uncooperative with the Bolshevik government. Film resources were scarce. What little they had was consolidated in a cinema committee within the New People's Commissariat of Education. Headed by Lenin's wife, the cinema committee founded a film school to train new filmmakers, the VGIK, All-Union State Institute of Cinematography, or the Moscow Film School, as came to be called. This was founded in 1919 and would become the world's first film school. Now, the school's primary function was to train people to make films in support of the Bolshevik political party, making newsreels for the purposes of agitation and propaganda, agitprop. But the Moscow Film School wasn't only a communist mouthpiece. Faculty were also interested in the theory of film. One of the school's co-founders, Lev Kuleshov, would bring new insight into the psychological workings of motion pictures. Lev Kuleshov was one of the few pre-revolutionary filmmakers to remain in Russia after 1919. Working as a newsreel cameraman during the revolution, Kuleshov was instrumental to the founding of the VGIK. But Kuleshov's superiors at the film school didn't think the young 20-something could work well in a traditional curriculum setting. So they let him conduct his own study group outside the formal structure of the school. This study group became known as the Kuleshov Workshop and attracted the more radical and innovative film students. With film stock being so rare, Kuleshov spent most of his time making films without celluloid, writing scenarios and assembling actors in a sort of mock filmmaking exercise. But their studies would take a major turn when D.W. Griffith's Intolerance played for the first time in Moscow in May of 1919. Lenin loved Intolerance for its plea for the proletariat and agitational quality, so he ordered it to be screened all across the Soviet Union. Intolerance not only became the most influential film in Russia for the next 10 years, but also a subject of deep, intense study at the Kuleshov Workshop. They dissected D.W. Griffith's editing style, even deconstructing the shots themselves, reassembling them in hundreds of different ways to examine the impact that different edits had. Once new film stock was becoming available in 1922 as a result of a Soviet-German trade agreement, Kuleshov was ready to experiment with some of the lessons learned from studying Griffith's film. The first experiment would illustrate what has become known as the Kuleshov effect. Kuleshov took a shot of an expressionless face and created a short film, combining the face with a bowl of hot soup, a woman in a coffin, and a seductive girl on a couch. Now, he showed this film to audiences, and they raved about the range of emotion the actor portrayed, from pensiveness and hunger at the thought of long, forgotten soup, to sadness and mourning at the loss of a loved one taken far, far too early, to lust and forbidden desire over the beautiful, sexy girl. Even though we know the shots are exactly the same, audiences read emotion into the actor's face by the nature of the shots around it. In another experiment, Kuleshov took 3 shots: an actor smiling, a close-up of a revolver, and the actor looking frightened. Shown to an audience, the interpretation was that the actor was growing cowardly. But reverse the order of the shots, and now the audience interprets the actor as growing brave. It's the exact same 3 shots, but the order changes the meaning. Though other filmmakers like D.W. Griffith had practiced this type of editing instinctively, Kuleshov was the first to put it into theory. The meaning of the film was not only in its spatial reality, how things are arranged in a frame, but in the film strip itself, the sequence of the shot. To further push the boundaries, Kuleshov experimented with artificial landscapes through creative geography, cutting together pieces of film captured in totally different locations. Kuleshov could create a believable, fictionalized geography in a film that didn't exist in real life. This was a departure from the continuity editing of the West that sought to smooth cuts with techniques like cutting on action and the 180-degree rule. Kuleshov was demonstrating that the film could transcend space and time, that the viewer could construct the geography in their own heads as they were watching the film. To Kuleshov, the creation of film didn't start when cameras rolled. That was just getting the raw material. A film is born in the edit, which the Soviets called montage, from the French verb monter, which means to assemble. This montage theory would see even greater refinement by one of Russia's most famous silent filmmakers and brief student of the Kuleshov workshop, Sergei Eisenstein. Sergei Eisenstein, along with D.W. Griffith, are the two pioneering geniuses of early cinema. Though Griffith would create the language of continuity editing through practice and practical problem solving, Eisenstein would approach film intellectually. Griffith and his American contemporaries used film and editing techniques to enhance emotional impact, almost as an extension of 19th century theatrical methods. Whereas Eisenstein used editing to break free of the confines of time and space and communicate abstract ideas in a new and modern way. Battleship Potemkin would be Eisenstein's most critically acclaimed and influential film. Shot in 1925 as a 20th anniversary of the 1905 revolution against the Tsar, Potemkin took 10 weeks to shoot, with the famous Odessa Steppe sequence shot in 7 days. The editing took another 2 weeks to accomplish. Running 86 minutes long, Potemkin contained 1,346 shots. Battleship Potemkin was an international success, a clear win for Eisenstein and his use of montage to elicit emotional response from the viewer. So influential was the film that Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels called it a marvelous film without equal in cinema. Anyone who had no firm political conviction could become a Bolshevik after seeing the film. The film was pure propaganda, but the best propaganda ever made. Key to Potemkin's success was the editing, which is where Eisenstein begins to articulate his most important contribution to film theory. Eisenstein, a true intellectual and Marxist, saw montage as a process which operated in the same way as a Marxist dialectic, which is a way of looking at history as a perpetual conflict in which a thesis or a force collides with an antithesis or a counterforce to create a new phenomenon called a synthesis. Eisenstein saw the collision of one shot or montage cell with another, creating conflict that produced a new idea. This new idea would become its own thesis and collide with another antithesis, creating yet another synthesis idea. Again and again, these dialectics build up in a film, like a series of controlled explosions in an internal combustion engine, driving the film forward. Now, on the subject of editing, Eisenstein lists 5 methods of montage, or how these collisions between shots can be created, each one building on the complexity of the previous one. The first and the most basic is the metric montage, cutting based purely on the length of the shot. This elicits the most basic emotional response, that of tempo, which can be raised or lowered for effect. Next is rhythmic montage, which is much like metric in that it's based on time and tempo, but rhythmic concerns with what's inside the frame as well, cutting in tempo with the action. In this shot from Potemkin, the rhythm of the marching soldier's legs drives the movement of the sequence beyond the tempo of the cut. Next in complexity is the tonal montage, which isn't concerned with time, but with the tone of the shot, from the lighting, the shadows, the shapes of the frame. Cutting between shots of different aesthetic tones creates these Marxist dialectics. Above that is overtonal, which is a larger scale macro cell. It combines metric, rhythmic, and tonal montage, essentially how whole sequences play against each other. Then lastly was a type of montage that most interested Eisenstein, the intellectual or ideological montage. Whereas the previous methods focused on inducing emotional response, the intellectual montage sought to express abstract ideas by creating relationships between opposing visual intellectual concepts. A simple example in Battleship Potemkin is the intercutting of the priest tapping on the cross, with an officer tapping on the hilt of a sword, to express the message of a corrupt association between the church and the Tsarist regime. Another example is the final sequence in the Odessa Steps sequence. 3 quick shots of a rising stone lion representing the rise of the proletariat. So invested in the intellectual montage, Eisenstein dedicated his next film, October, a 10th anniversary recreation of the Bolshevik Revolution, to exploring its possibilities. Running at just under 3 hours with lots of intellectual and ideological montage cutting, October was an experimental film of immense proportion that ultimately left audiences cold. The wild cuts were simply too much for audiences to follow. While intellectual montage can evoke deep, abstract ideas without being rooted in a strong narrative framework as it was in Battleship Potemkin, the intellectual montage was just too much abstraction for audiences to follow. Some film theorists, such as the French film critic André Bazin, claimed that the dialectical montage was too manipulative and too totalitarian in the way it seeks to control the audience by ignoring natural spatial and time relationships found in continuity editing or long takes. The debate may be a matter of taste, but the effects of early Soviet silent filmmakers and their montage theory would be refined and pushed even further in the 1950s as the French New Wave, as well as Hollywood visionaries like Alfred Hitchcock, began incorporating montage as part of their storytelling technique. With both the continuity style of D.W. Griffith, with the emphasis on clear, understandable space and time, and the Soviet montage style, which ignored space and time to create impact through the juxtaposition of different images, the rudiments of cinematic language emerged in roughly the first 30 years of cinema's existence, quickly making it a nuanced and intricate art form through experimentation and theory. These first film practitioners, who studied and built on each other's work, would in turn be studied and imitated by the next generation of filmmakers, on and on, carrying the human tradition of storytelling. So be part of that tradition, study other filmmakers, and then go make something great.
Now, with that video, I hope the entire montage school or the Soviet montage history is clear to you. It traces the role of film during the Soviet Russia, how it became a medium of propaganda, how even the political leaders they used cinema as a medium to propagate their ideas, and all the other important filmmakers of the time like Kuleshov, Eisenstein, and Kuleshov effect, montage used by these filmmakers in various ways. All these were very, very clearly dealt in that particular video. So I hope that is clear to you now. Now we'll move to the next part, that is cut or sequencing. And cut usually denotes splicing of two shots together made by the film editor in the post-production stage. A cut between sequences of shots makes a very rapid transition temporally and spatially. So this transition from one shot to the other shot, or how this is made possible by the editor. So the various cuts or the various sequencing that are used by the editor in achieving this seamless transition. That is something that we are going to see in the coming video.
The most basic edit you can do is the cut, which is simply going from one shot to another, changing perspective, advancing the story. Now I'm going to be showing you a series of examples that help illustrate the types of cuts that I'm about to mention. A lot of these cuts are so common and feel so natural that you don't even think about it. Whoa, what the f*** happened there? Doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want. But if you want to make your cuts a little less jarring, let's begin with a technique that's used all the time, cutting on action. Now all this means is cutting from one shot to another while the subject is still in motion. It doesn't always have to be on a punch, or a kick, It could be something as simple as a character turning, or throwing something, or a character going through a door, or another door, or another door.
Come through.
Then there's the cutaway, which I can best describe as cutting to an insert shot of something and then back. The insert could exist in the same space as the characters.
You want the moon?
Like this.
Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down. Hey, that's a pretty good idea.
Or you can use a cutaway to get inside the head of a character.
Last night I was...
Cross-cutting. This is when the editor intercuts back and forth between locations. For example, most phone conversations are usually cross-cut, and when used effectively, cross-cutting can certainly amp up the tension and suspense of a sequence. This technique is also used to show what's going on inside the character's head.
Don't move. I don't want you to cut your own throat.
Jump cuts are when the editor cuts between the same shot, and they are often used to deliberately show the passing of time. And that looks like this. So you can naturally find these in montages. Here's a few examples.
Let go of me! Don't!
Jump cuts are also used to add a level of urgency to the scene. And there's a lot of jump cuts in baseball. Now let's move on to the match cut. Match cuts look like this.
Come on, guys, let's get to work. Yeah!
Match cuts are often incorrectly referred to as jump cuts. However, there is a difference. A match cut cuts from one shot to a similar shot by either matching the action or the composition. Match cuts are mainly used as scene transitions because you're often jumping from one place to another, which is most likely why there's confusion on the matter. Match cuts don't always have to be visual either. There's also verbal match cuts, like this.
That looks just like an enormous... Wang! Pay attention.
I was distracted by that enormous flying...
Willie. Yeah. What's that? Well, it looks like a giant...
Johnson. Yes, sir.
Now let's move on to transitions, starting off with fade in, fade out. We've seen this 1,000 times, and it's just dissolving either to or from black. Pretty self-explanatory. Now a dissolve is when you blend one shot into another, and that could look something like this. These are commonly used in montages as well, and also can represent a passing of time. Now, you could easily dissolve between the same shot, and it looks something like this. Smash cut! Smash cuts are abrupt transitions. The obvious example is someone waking up from an intense dream or a nightmare. Going from something intense to quiet, or quiet to intense.
I shot my way out. Everybody started shooting, so I blasted my way out of there.
Well begun is half done.
Another transition is the iris. Now, the iris used to be an in-camera effect back in the day when you can manually open and close your iris to transition from black. Nowadays, it's used as a stylistic choice. And a lot of these transitions you may often find within a scene. Some other transitions include the wipe. And a wipe is a wipe.
On the move.
Look at that, it wiped. Oh look, there's another. Okay, moving on. Oh, no, there's more wipes? Oh, there are many types of wipes. Then there's the invisible cut. Invisible cuts are used to give the impression of a single take. However, cuts are hidden in blackness, like in Hitchcock's Rope. Or Evil Dead 2. And most recently, Birdman. Cuts are also hidden within whip pans, where you can hide the cut on the motion of the camera movement. Here are a few examples.
I'm back. Perfect time.
As you know, endorsed by the PTA and the North American Teachers Foundation.
We coming to get you, Barbara!
An editor might also hide a cut with an object crossing the frame. Or you can hide a cut when the subject leaves the frame. This is my favorite example because it's pretty seamless unless you know what you're looking for. Just like any good magic trick. So there's an invisible cut hidden right here. This shot was cleverly designed to make it appear as if Paul Newman was actually doing those card tricks. But really, he can't. Now let's move on to something else. The L-cut is an audio-based transition. This is when the audio from the current shot carries over to the next shot. Now keep in mind, this doesn't have to just be for scene transitions. This is used all the time, even when characters are just talking to each other.
Won't have to take this abuse much longer.
They don't serve fried chicken and watermelon on a daily basis in my mess hall. Yes, sir!
That you, John Wayne? Is this me?
The J-cut is when the audio from the next scene starts before you get to it.
I can't, I gotta go home.
So you hear what's going on before you see what's going on. These are very subtle editing techniques that people might not even notice, and that's the point. The J-cut and the L-cut are designed to specifically create a seamless flow, a seamless transition from one scene to another, with audio guiding the way.
Hey, Gordy, I got something for you.
This, my friend, is for you.
That's all it is. They're like the police department for wise guys.
The J-cut is also great for revealing a new element within a scene.
Plus, you can't take them underwater, and if you do, Neat.
Once you know all the types of cuts available to you, then you can start mixing and matching them. The Graduate does this match cut into a J-cut.
Ben, what are you doing?
Or there's the match J-cut.
If you could fight anyone, who would you fight?
Fight my boss, probably.
And here's a verbal match J-cut.
And the line goes...
Roar!
Here's a cross-cutting cutaway.
I tried not to think of the words searing or flesh.
Mad Max does this cutaway jump cut. Let's just take a look at that one again. They cut from Max to his vision, cut back, and they jump cut the impact to really sell the hit. Here it is again at full speed. Here's a jump cut, cross cut, smash cut.
I'm so smart. That's funny. Okay, we open at the beginning of time. No, okay, we open with LaRoche driving into the swamp.
Crazy white man.
Gladiator has a great cross-cutting match cut thing going on in this sequence. The Green Mile also has a great match cross-cutting sequence. Then there's the match dissolve. And here's another example. Saving Private Ryan does this morph match thing. So that's about it. Now you know the kinds of cuts and transitions you can use. Next is to ask yourself when and why you would use them for telling your story. And I'm sure I've left out plenty of other great examples, so I encourage you to share some of your favorite cuts in the comments below. Share some of your work in our forums, and if you're curious about which movie that clip was from, just turn on closed captioning. Okay, that's enough. I'll talk to you next time.
So dears, I think after watching the two videos, I hope you have got a clear idea about the entire editing process with the different types of editing, the different types of cuts that are used in film. So how editing becomes an invisible art which makes the transition, the seamless transition possible in film. So I think that's all for today's session. If you need to watch any more videos, you can click on to the link given at the end of the lecture and watch it also. These are some of the links I have given. I'll upload the PPT too, so that you can just click on the link and watch the videos. Thank you.